fishing. I mean, I'm talking about some of the most ridiculous topwater, most aggressive bass that I've ever seen. Okay, welcome back to the Striped Bass Hunt podcast. It's been a while, which is kind of a big understatement. It's been the whole winter, pretty much. Now we're getting into spring. And the reason I didn't do a podcast, and there's no real good reason why I haven't been able to do a podcast, but I was really working hard on building the fishing shed. But the other thing is I've recorded legitimately 6 podcasts, and in every single one of them, something has gone wrong. And then I procrastinated and not wanted to do another one right afterwards. And so, it's just kept getting pushed back and further and further and further. So I apologize about not being able to put out podcasts. And I was super humbled by the amount of people that were contacting me through DMs saying that they really love the podcast. I need to bring the podcast back. So hopefully, fingers crossed, for the love of God, can we get this podcast to not have a problem to get it through? Because it's literally been an absolute struggle. And I feel like I've streamlined the process right now. I have everything set up perfectly to how I've done it in the past. I got a little bit bigger, beefier computer this time. So hopefully that will be the thing that will help us out in the long run here, because if it's not the audio that's the problem, it's the video, and it's just been an absolute nightmare the whole ride through it. So I also apologize if I'm looking at my computer, because I see myself there, and so I'm going to be checking that a lot. Sorry, but it is what it is. Okay, so let's get into it. The winter has been a very interesting time for me. I've been really focusing mostly on trying to really build my Instagram and work on getting out photos and content for you there throughout the winter. And as I said earlier, I really was focusing on actually making this fishing shed. As you can see, it came out pretty well. I got a bunch of plugs up on the wall. I was really, organized everything. I have everything labeled. You can kind of see it over there, everything that's labeled. And I was super focused on that because I feel like one of the most major things for me is streamlining my productivity, and the best way for me to do that is just to be really super organized. I'm going to be guiding this this summer, and I'm super excited to be guiding this summer. And one of those things that's very important for me is going to be having everything that's organized and being able to easily and quickly set everything up, get rods and reels set up to the best of my ability, and get everything rolling. And hopefully this season's going to be the best season yet. I feel like I've been very fortunate to really each year just make huge leaps and bounds in my fishing, and I feel like that's how it goes. You fish as much as I do, you learn so much every single season. I've been really fortunate, especially last season, to meet some of the best fishermen, surfcasters in the world, and talk with them and kind of pick their brain on certain things. So I feel like last year I probably had my biggest leap in knowledge than in the years past, just because I got to meet a bunch of really, really smart fishermen. And I feel like it's very interesting because the one thing that I found with a lot of the best fishermen is they're almost like students of the game, where they love to learn. They love to experiment, and they love to really break down why, the why of surf casting. And what I mean by the why is if you have a really good bite one day and then the next day the bite is completely dead, what do you do and why did that happen? And that's something that I've had happen personally to me. And other people, and it's all about the little details, the bait, the wind, the tide, the moon, everything plays a little factor into it. And these people that I've talked to tend to really do a good job of breaking that down, and really do a good job of utilizing those like fishing logs and other stuff to really help them be a step above the game. And that's why, like, at the end of the day, you got to put in the amount of time that these guys have to be able to catch the big fish. And I mean, a lot of people wonder, like, how does this person catch such big fish? And it is just true. It's so true that all those people spend a ridiculous amount of time off the water doing their homework and writing in their logs and doing a lot of work on the back end to be able to catch those fish when it actually matters. So one major part and reason why I actually stopped doing the podcast is because I really wanted to get on some more guests. And the reason I wanted to get on more guests is just because I did almost 40 episodes, maybe even almost 50 episodes. I don't know, it was something like that. This is season 2 of the Striped Bass Hunt Show, season 2 of the Striped Bass Hunt podcast. And so that's what I'm doing here. It's season 2. So I'm super excited about that. And I hope this thing is not too loud on us here. But yeah, so we're doing season 2 for the Striped Bass Hunt podcast. And I'm hopefully going to get on some of those people that I talked to this past year and hopefully get on some guests. But, I've thought a lot about how all sorts of people, I thought a lot about bringing the podcast back just as me saying, what I say and talking about my personal experiences and telling the stories from this past season and what I've learned and everything like that. And I've learned so much throughout the season. I documented a lot of that via the podcast. I stopped kind of in August, so I kind of want to pick up from there. August was a very interesting time. I think probably the last thing that you guys heard me talk about would have been the really crazy blitz that I had off of the beach and getting into those 30-pound, 40-pound fish that was just the most ridiculous fishing I've ever been a part of. And, I talk about like peanut bunker, and what I've come to realize is that a lot of people, peanut bunker is like 5 or 6 inch peanut bunker. For us on Cape Ann, at least in my personal experience, we get these really, really small peanut bunker that are maybe 1 inch to 2 inches long. They're not, and they can be smaller than 1 inch too. I mean, they're really small compared to other places where a lot of the time the peanut bunker that they're referring to is like 4, maybe 5 inches long. And that's something that I never really thought about until I was watching some videos and talking to some other guys that fish more in New York, New Jersey, and they're talking about peanut bunker. And I was like, wow, our peanut bunker is a lot smaller than what they're dealing with. So the thing that I was really curious about was why such, generally, there was generally, and this is very generally, but, I guess the saying is, even elephants eat peanuts, so even monster striped bass will eat small peanuts. But it was very interesting to me that school of peanut bunker that were really small peanut bunker drew in such huge fish. And it was actually pretty shocking to me when I went out there. In my log and in my past experience, it's one of the first places that we get blitzes. I went there just to poke around. Literally, I was just poking around just to check it out. I had it written in my log. It's roughly this week. And, I tend to poke around in the evening. I'll swing by that beach and always check it out because generally you can get some pretty sick blitzes on that beach. And most of the time they're maybe 20 to 30 inch fish. Rarely are they into the 40 inches. And I've never in my life seen it into the 45, 50 inch range. And that is something that was super shocking to me. And I really wondered why. And it was very interesting to me because as the season progressed and as the year went throughout the fall, that was the main biomass of big fish that moved through. And I don't know why that they did so early, but it was just pretty shocking to me because after that huge group of monsters moved through, we had not very good fishing after that. I mean, the fishing was slow, and everybody, and even some of the best fishermen that I know of were not catching big fish around me. And I was just like, man, this sucks right now. And they're like, yeah, welcome to Fall Run 2020. because it's absolute garbage. And that was so funny because I always thought that, you know, the fall run to me is always like a bunch of schoolie bass, and you generally get on pretty solid bites, whether they're blitzing or not. They're just around in a good amount. And it's one of those things that you kind of, you follow your logs, you follow the wind. Okay, if the wind's blowing here, then it's going to push a bunch of bass and bait in here, and you're probably going to have a decent bite. That's just from my personal experience. Then that exact thing was happening in times that, you know, I was fishing at night in past years and catching bass that were like 40, 43 inches. I was getting none of that. That was not even happening. It was mainly during the day, and if you were to catch those like big fish, it was an absolute grinder. I mean, I'm talking 6 hours of absolutely not a hit, and then maybe you'll get like a 42, which is really tough, especially on new fishermen and people that are not as experienced, to not be getting any action and 6 hours later get one hit. That's all you get all night. That's like, it's brutal. That was pretty tough and a hard pill to swallow, because I was like, wow, it went from some of the most lights out topwater fishing. I'm talking about, I had 5 bass over 45, or no, I had 8 bass over 45 inches in an hour, one day. It was like some of the most ridiculous fishing, as I kind of compared it to, was like the Cape Cod Canal in its heyday. Like that was, and I never really fished the Cape Cod Canal in its heyday, maybe once or twice, but all I heard was, you know, it was epic fishing where you'd have those days where you could get 8 45-inch bass. And that's what it was sounding like to me. Like the fishing that I was having was really, really productive. And I thought that that was something that was really, really kind of cool and actually really encouraging. I was thinking to myself, this is like really encouraging for the future. The future stocks seem to be pretty decent in that upper class. Now, as a lot of us found, there was a missing chunk of fish that were like that really 28 to 35 inch class fish was just not there. And I honestly saw a good amount of them later in the fall, but I'm talking about late in the fall. I'm talking about end of October, like very end of October. There was a handful of bass. I was using black and purple SP minnows, and I was just reeling them. I was crawling them through boulder fields, and I was getting like 33s and 34s and 28s and 29s, and that was like solid fishing, and for what it is, I mean, what it was at that point. But I guess it kind of got better towards the end, and I really did well on bucktails during the day, which is kind of shocking. I know bucktails are killer plugs, but you don't really see like a bucktail producing like that in just random conditions. I mean, I had a handful of bass that were 40 inches. I broke off in a bass that was probably 45 inches in this was like within the October 20 range. Like it was, I don't know if it was like the 22nd or 24th. It was like around then of October, which is for Cape Ann, a fairly late large fish like that. Like you don't normally see bass like that. I mean, if you catch a 40-inch bass or bass if you catch a bass in the mid 30s, that's like pretty crazy for late October. I know it happens, but it doesn't, I personally, that's never even come close to that. Most of the time, if I'm getting bass that are in the low 30s, I'm like shocked. And that was a really, really big fish. It was probably 30 pounds, 30 plus pounds, but it ended up breaking me off because I was using super light tackle. But I fought it for a while. It was up on the surface. I got a good look at it. I'm not like really exaggerating here. It was a solid fish, but for how the fall was, that was kind of the average fish we were getting. I would say in our fall run started, I feel like fairly early, but for that like main bulk migration, I thought it started pretty early. It turns out that, you know, it probably ended up starting even earlier. I'm talking about maybe the second week of August. We were seeing bait migrations. At least I was personally seeing a lot of peanut bunker kind of getting flushed out of like estuaries or flushed into like harbors and back bays, which I'd personally not seen before. And I thought that was kind of crazy to see that early. And that's when I immediately started looking at the beaches and was like, okay, this should happen pretty soon, because in my log it says the third week of August, I started to see some blitzes on this beach. And first day that I went and looked, which I don't know if it was like the second or third week of August, there were there are tons of peanut bunker, and then probably 100 yards, 200 yards offshore, too far to cast. It was like probably just out of casting range. There was just freight training monster fish that were so big that I couldn't compute in my head that they're actually as big as they were. And they kept getting closer and closer and closer. And I had this light carbon surf, which I'll talk a lot more about because this is my spring setup and I want to get into, early spring fishing. But let's just end the fall here so you guys get caught up to what happened during the end of my fall. But I ended up hooking into a 43 on that rod, and I was like so shocked by that. It was I thought it was like, oh, it's 25 inches. No, they were like 40 to 48, 50-inch fish. They're huge bass. And I ended up catching like a 35-pound fish on the GSB Skinner. So it's the 9'2" rod later that day. It was absolutely nutty fishing, and hopefully I can actually input some photos here. Maybe not. We'll see. But I'll throw some photos down from that day. I mean, it was pretty awesome fishing, and I was super stoked by that. So moving on here. So we had I keep kind of bouncing back and forth in my my fall fishing because from like late fall to like mid fall and early fall. But let's go chronological here. Started off with those crazy blitzes. Then probably 2 days later, I was off Boulder Fields throwing 6-inch yellow over white Pumbaa plugs, small Pumbaa pencil, which might have a name change soon. Stay tuned for that. Anyway, I was using that plug and I was crushing, and I mean crushing, huge bass. And I'm talking all of these bass. I was also using the large Magnum Walker as well. The Pumbaa Plugs large Magnum Walker. And that was the day where I was getting all those big fish. Then probably, I would say after that bite died, which lasted about 2 days, where I had like really good action with monster bass, which I might throw some photos in right now. Maybe not, we'll see. But once that bite died, I'm talking about dead. I'm talking about nobody was getting a bass over 30 inches. I mean, that was like really humbling because you went from just hot heat fishing. I mean, I'm talking about some of the most ridiculous topwater, most aggressive bass that I've ever seen. You could throw anything out there. You could work it as hard as you want, and those bass are coming up and crushing it. And that was just so shocking to me. And so that's how my kind of that time period was so hot. And then I went to dead. I'm talking about late August, or like from like probably, like late August to early October was quiet. And then all of a sudden, the blitzes started back up again in late October. We had some of the most epic blitzes. I actually wasn't here for like the 2 or 3 days of it being the hottest. I actually wasn't here. I was getting I was getting text messages from a guy that was back here, and he was like, dude, where are you? And I was like, I'm in Montauk, which was a fun experience, and I was catching fish, but they were crushing bass from 25 to 35 inches, and it was every single cast from, first light to last light all day long. You could get bass, and in certain areas you'd get some significantly larger fish, and that were like 40 inches. And so there were some like really epic blitzes, and these were all on peanut bunker. And in certain cases, they're transitioning to mackerel. There's like a lot of mackerel feeding on the peanut bunker, and then there are a little bit bigger bass that are feeding on the mackerel. I actually hate fishing like mimicking mackerel when fishing for striped bass, because I don't know, I just always found that the bass don't really like feeding on mackerel when they're frothed up and zooming around, because I honestly think they're too fast for them. But you can live line and mackerel, and you're going to kill it on live lining mackerel. Or if they're stuck in the Cape Cod Canal, you're going to be crushing them on mackerel. But for some reason, I've just never had any real scenarios where I'm seeing bass like blitzing on mackerel. I just haven't personally seen it. And I've seen some big schools of mackerel, but for some reason the bass just stay away. Anyway, so I come back from Montauk, and this was the end of the blitzes. I think I had maybe 2 days where it was like, you'd have like that early morning, few fish here, few fish there, blitzes. I was chasing them around. It was a really good send-off at the end of the season, but most of the bass were really small by that point. I'm talking only in the 20s. And then we really started to get into like late fall, winter fishing. And the reason I say winter is because literally snowing. It was literally snowing, and I was catching fish. I actually didn't catch any fish during the day that it was snowing, but the 3 or 4 days afterwards, I was catching bass. I even caught a bass that was 30 inches in November. I believe it was November 9th. November 9th was the last day I caught a fish, and it was like 30 incher, which was pretty awesome. I heard of guys getting them into the November 15th on Cape Ann, which is absolutely mind-blowing. That's like the latest I've ever heard of bass. And I also heard of guys getting bass in December on Cape Cod, which just, I guess, shows you how late the season was and how weird it was. It was just a strange season for many, many reasons. But yeah, it was a really strange season. So that was kind of the end of my season. I didn't end up doing any podcasts, but then I ended up doing a lot of serious renovations, like on the fishing shed, and I did a lot of work with getting everything prepared and a lot of emails and whatever. So I'm dealing with the business, and then now we're getting into early spring, which is something that I really want to talk about because it's coming around the corner. We're really, really close to it. I'm probably a month away from bass on Cape Ann. And what I mean by that is what are we date? The date is the 28th of March right now. We're probably going to see bass around around the 20th of April is probably when we're going to be seeing the first schoolie bass on Cape Ann. And that's in select few estuaries, and they might be semi-holdover fish. But they're going to be showing up around then, which is super cool. So, and hopefully I'll be able to do maybe a little traveling in April. Maybe I'll sneak down to New York, New Jersey. Maybe I'll fish Connecticut. Maybe I'll fish Cape Cod and Rhode Island, that area. Who knows? We'll just see how the season goes. We'll see how desperate I get to catch fish. I'm pretty desperate right now, honestly. I'm about to drive, and when I get the feels, you guys, a few of you guys know what I'm talking about, but when you get the feels and cabin fever's to the max, you gotta and you're okay, I need to get on a fish. And I wanted to talk a lot about the setup, the rod, the reel, the line, the lures, everything. I just kind of want to go through my early spring, and I'm going to talk about fishing up to before I can get onto what I would call a trophy fish or a large bass, anything over 20 pounds. So working up to that size bass, we're talking about, we're going to get hopefully mid-20s, and this setup, I would be comfortable fishing into the mid-30s. I mean, honestly, I've caught bass in the mid-40s on this, but I would be comfortable fishing it, targeting bass into the mid-30s on this rod. But if you guys are in that position where you're hooking into a fish that is 45 inches, you could use this rod and you could land it. And as you probably saw, if I put in the pictures, I've done it and I've caught some serious bass on this rod, and I'm super stoked about it because it's turned into one of my favorite rods. And that is the Lamiglass Carbon Surf. And this is the 9-foot light. So the Lamiglass Carbon Surf is one of the most underrated rods on the market right now. And the reason I say it's one of the most underrated rods is because it is probably one of the best rods that I've used in a while for the price point. And what I mean by that is it's a very affordable rod, but it fishes so I fished a lot of different rod companies. I'm talking about, I fished Lamiglass, I fished St. Croix, I fished Century, Penn, I fished a lot of different companies, Fuji, and some of the most high-end rods that they have. And this is an awesome fast action rod for the money. I'm talking about it fishes I know I have other fast action rods that are whatever, $1,200 rods, and they honestly fish like this rod. I mean, this rod fishes like a $1,200 rod, which is really extraordinary for the price point of being just under $200. I think, it's like, or maybe way under $200. I don't know. I forget what the actual price of this is, but it's under $200 for sure. But it fishes like a really solid rod. And the reason I say why it fishes, the reason I'm going to say it fishes like that, you guys are probably like, there's no way. The reason it is because it's a very sensitive rod, meaning you can really feel everything that's going on when you're fishing soft plastics, any subtle plug that you're going to be fishing. You can really feel what the plug is doing, how it's being affected by, the current, the wind, anything that's going on, the wave sweep. Like, you can really feel what's going on the other side of your line. And that is really, really important when you're fishing for really small bass, really finicky bass, ones that are early season. You need that extra sensitivity. But the thing that this rod does better than any other rod that I've ever fished that is this light is it has incredible backbone for how light it is. And what I mean by that is I was able to turn mid 40-inch bass with this rod in boulder fields. So I get a lot of crap for how heavy I fish. And for good reason, because I do fish too heavy, but I don't lose bass. I probably give up casting distance and I probably give up certain bites, but I'd rather not hook a fish than hook it and lose it. So for my lightest setups here, I'm talking about, and I'll go with, this is like the expensive version of what I would fish. And then this is like the more affordable, easier version of what I'd fish. And what I mean by that is like the reels. These are two great reels. Penn makes some extraordinary reels. This is the 3500 Penn Slammer, and it is a great reel. The Penn Battle series is another incredible series of reel, and I highly suggest it if you want something that matches up really well with the price point. You want something that is cheaper, relatively speaking, in the fishing world, but still is going to be able to handle any fish you can get. It's going to have fairly smooth drag, and it's going to be or by fairly smooth drag, it has really smooth drag. The Penn series, like the Battles and the Slammers, have incredibly smooth drag, but they also have they're fairly sealed reels as well. So if you dunk them and you spray them down well and you wash them out and you make sure they're greased and you keep good care of them, you can really fish these hard. You can get sprayed by waves and everything, and they really do stand up. The good thing about Penn is they have good customer service, so if they do break, you can send them back in. I'm not sponsored by Penn, so that's really my personal feelings towards them. So I think Penn is a great reel. Also, Van Staal's. But I have to say, Van Staal's, if you're gonna be fishing, especially the way that I fish, which is just really hard, and I fish every day, there's no better reel than a Van Staal, and that's period. They have the Saltex reel that came out, which I actually own a Saltex reel, but I broke it in literally, what was it? 2 trips? I broke it in 2 trips, and I broke it on like a 25-inch bass. It blew up the gears on the inside of that reel, and I had done nothing to it. I literally put it in my car, took it out into the estuary one day, fished it for a half hour, put it back in the car, drove it home, came back out the next day, fished it again in the estuaries, and blew up my drag. I did nothing to that reel. I didn't drop it, didn't bang it, didn't do anything to the reel. The thing exploded, which I've never seen. I didn't even dunk it, so it didn't even get any salt water in it. But just like from that alone, I know for a fact that there's no way that reel can even withstand a fraction of what, the Van Staal does, just from that experience alone. I couldn't even imagine a Van Staal breaking like that so quickly. They're just too well built. And that's why Van Staals are so awesome, is because they're just such a hardy reel. You can really get sand, salt, and really abuse the reel. Not really washed off very well, and the thing will continue to perform all season long. And for somebody like me that fishes 180 days a season and pretty much 3 times a day every day, that's going to be, you need a reel that's going to perform and is not going to break. And even to say the Penn's probably, I know for a fact, as I've fished primarily Penn's as my go-to reel before, and they don't hold up for me throughout the season. The Van Staals consistently hold up throughout the whole season. So I know that if I'm going to suggest like the best like combo for this rod, I'm going to say the Van Staal VSX 150. I like to spool that with 30-pound braid. I have 30-pound Max Quattro, Power Pro Max Quattro braid on this. And I have that too. And for leader materials, I have a 80-pound barrel swivel, a Spiro 80-pound power barrel swivel, to a Tactical Angler's 50-pound power clip. And the leader material, I always use fluorocarbon because it's just a little bit more abrasion resistant. It has nothing to do with it being more invisible. I just think that it's just a little bit tougher, has a little bit less stretch, and is a little bit more abrasion resistant. So I use the Blue Label Seagar in 30 pounds. So I'm going 30-pound braid to 30-pound leader, and that's what I fish for the estuaries and also like a little bit off the beaches, but I don't fish it very often. I'm off the beaches because generally by the time I'm fishing off the beaches, there's some serious fish around, and this is a little too light for what I like. So that is my setup. And again, I've fished this Lamb Glass 9-foot light carbon surf, which is rated from 3/8 to 2 ounces. It's a moderate fast action. And the reason I like that it says kind of moderate fast is because when you are fighting a big fish, the bend that is primarily in the tip, you do get the power all the way down to the butt of your rod, and you can really turn these bass with this rod. And that's why I can't say enough good things about this rod, just because I've caught some serious fish on it and it's performed flawlessly for me. It casts really far, and it's just an awesome rod. If you want a fun, pretty cheap rod to mess around with in the estuaries, I highly suggest, or in the back bays even, highly suggest this rod. It's just such a fun rod from bass that are smaller. I mean, I'm talking like if you have like 15-inch bass all the way up to like 35-inch bass, this rod is just killer for that. And it throws your whole spectrum as well. And that's what I really like, is both of these rods and both of these reels handle the plugs that I throw in the early spring very well. And the reason the reason I fish these plugs here, and this is what I would say is a light bag. And what I mean by that is like a light spring bag, and not like the bag itself. And I'll get to the bags because that's something that's kind of changed a bit for me in the past season. Is I've gone through a couple different plug bags, and I wanted to talk about that because it's a pretty frequently common asked question to me, is what plug bags I'm using, what leader material, what rod, reel, regardless. So that's kind of why I wanted to go really in depth on that, exactly what I use for my rod reel combos. And yeah, I'm going to get into kind of the plugs. And this is like, what do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different plugs, I think. So these are 7 plugs that I use a decent amount in the spring. And I really want to, like, if this is kind of my light strike bag. As what I mean by that is, like, if I'm going to go for a little mission and I just want a handful of plugs that can pretty much cover all of my bases, these are what I'm bringing with me. And sizes are going to vary, obviously, depending on what's going on. Colors are going to vary depending on what's going on. But for, the purpose of, like, these are the plugs I use, these are the plugs that I use. So let's start with the Algae Whippet Fish, which I have on my carbon surf right now. This is like the smallest version of the Algae Whippet Fish that they make that I have on that. That's not generally what I throw when I'm in the estuaries. But if you really are looking for like holdover fish and stuff, something that small is definitely something you can mess around with. And by the way, this is probably the size of the bunker, which is maybe 3 inches or smaller. If you see it on the camera, this is a small little thing. This is the same size as the bunker that those 48 to 50-inch bass were feeding on, which is just like, I can't even believe that. Anyway, so Algae Whippet Fish, I use up to like probably 1.5 ounces in the estuaries, and that 1.5 ounces is like, that's pushing it. I mean, it's really got to be like a new moon and cranking current for me to want to use something that's that heavy. But I'm using probably generally a 1/2 ounce to maybe 1 ounce Algae Whippet Fish, and they do really well in the estuaries. They catch some pretty serious fish in the estuaries, but for some reason, when the bass are in there and they're feeding pretty heavily, they're a single hook. You can pretty much consistently catch fish on them. Something that I'm missing off of this is a small bucktail. I also kind of interchanged this with a bucktail just because bucktails are really productive, but they're a little bit hardier. They might not quite have the finessey, like pulling really finicky fish type deal that a soft plastic does, but they're pretty close, and I would rather be throwing a bucktail than a soft plastic if the bass are of the same size and of the same aggressiveness to one another. So algae whippet fish are going to be in my early spring bag because they just catch a lot of bass. They're easy to deal with. They're nice on the fish. They're not going to chew up the bass too badly. Okay, so and then obviously bucktails, I'm going to be using around the same weights for the bucktails, from like, half ounce to maybe an ounce and a half if we're getting crazy. But that's like pushing it a little bit. So anyway, so then I'm going to go into like, I guess another soft plastic that I do use a lot in the spring is a Slugo. A Slugo is a pretty awesome early spring bait. This is a little bit big for what I'm going to be normally using. This is, I think, maybe a 9 or a 10 inch Slugo, and I'm going to be throwing mostly 6 inches. It's like a 6-inch Slugo with an owner beast hook, which is what I have on right here. It's like it's a weedless hook presentation, and I fish this in 2 different ways in the estuaries. One way, if the bass are being really aggressive and they're feeding hard, I fish them like an underwater spook. I have my rod at a low angle. I twitch it pretty consistently like I'm working a spook across the surface of the water, and it does the same thing. When it's swimming on the surface of the water, it darts back and forth on the surface of the water. And the cool thing about having the owner beast hook is where the weight is, it kind of sinks pretty straight and pretty vertically, if that makes sense. So you can really get it to twitch back and forth in the water and kind of work it like a spook. And when the bass are feeding aggressively, it's a very productive way to work it. Another way I like to work it, if they're feeding a little less aggressively, is I do twitch, and I kind of pause it. And so what happens is it wiggles and it twitches and it swims and it looks like a live bait, and then it pauses and it kind of floats and glides in the water because of that owner beast hook, and the bass crush it on that pause. And it's like what I would kind of do is twitch, like maybe that fast. Like if you're looking at my wrist or hearing my voice, twitch, and then you kind of let it go. Twitch, and then you give it a pause. Twitch, pause. Twitch, pause. And that's going to get that, that little darting action. And then that pause is going to be very fish-like. And if an injured bait fish is dying in the water, it's twitching around, darting from side to side, and then it's kind of gliding through the water, and it just is going to get that bass to strike at it. So the Slugos are definitely a really productive plug that I highly suggest using. So another plug that I use a lot of, and now we're going to go into kind of like top water. Well, do you know what? We'll work our way up. We're talking soft plastics, and we're talking, kind of subsurface now. Why don't we talk about swimming plugs? So 2 swimming plugs that I use in the spring. I don't like using SP minnows very often. I said earlier in the podcast that I fish them in the late fall. I also fish them in the early spring. And I'm talking about late fall and early spring. I'm not a huge fan of SP minnows, but you got to give credit where credit is due. They do produce pretty well in the late fall and early spring. I have an inline single hook on the back and a small VMC treble on the front. Obviously, this time of year and for plugs of this size, I like to crush the barbs. So I like to go barbless this time of year. Obviously, 90% of the bass you're going to be hooking into are going to be pretty small. There's no real point in having a barb because if you lose a fish that's 25 inches, you're not going to be torn up about it. So pinching barbs is fun. And as well, it's good for you because bass that are like 25 to 30 inches are the bass that are going to be shoving a hook in your hand almost 100% of the time. It's very rare that you're getting a hook in the hand from a big fish, although it does happen. I think that it's much more common with those smaller bass. You fight them hard. They're pretty green when you get them in. They're thrashing all over the place. So to have barbless stuff is very good. Okay, so SP minnows work well, and I like to really work them slow. I like to reel them slow and let them just waddle away, and they do that awesome swimming motion in the water, and I reel them slow and straight pretty much, and that's pretty much the only way I'll fish them. I use them in the estuaries. I use them off the sandy beaches. I kind of let them go in the current. If there's strong current and I want a swimming plug and I don't want to throw my Redfin, which I'll get to in a second, I'll throw an SP minnow on. They kind of handle better in the current. I'll let it drift in the current a little bit, and they tend to swim just a little bit better in the current and work a little bit better in the current. So that's definitely a suggestion from me. If you're fishing a little stronger current, like an outflow, or pretty much like an outflow, or on a sandy beach, maybe in an estuary where it's really cranking, and you want to throw an SP, or you want to throw a swimming plug, an SP minnow is a pretty decent choice. So I like in the early spring, I like to fish during the day a good amount. Nighttime is very productive, but also late afternoon, evening, when it's sunny out is actually some of the most productive times, just because the water tends to be warmer and the bass are a little bit more frothed up when the water is a little bit warmer and they're feeling like, summer and spring's coming and they're really feeding hard. I like to use kind of during those times, the yellow over white. Obviously, it kind of looks like a bunker color. I'm a huge fan of fishing anything bunker. I don't know why. I just think yellow over white kind of mimics that. So I like to throw stuff that kind of mimics bunker. And so that's kind of the SP minnow deal. Of either fish this in black and purple or like a chicken scratch. And that is like my go-to there. So then we're going to be going to the Redfin. Obviously, honestly, to be fair, I've not used the Redfin that is this small, which is I believe the 5-inch version. So this is like a 5-inch Redfin. It's awesome because it's small. It's going to really do well in the estuaries when the current isn't very strong, or in the back bays when I'm just I'm hooking myself here because these hooks are razor sharp. Like in the estuaries when the bait, when the current isn't very strong in the back bays, you can work this really slow up on the surface. You can reel a little bit faster and it dives a little bit deeper. But I really like the how this fishes. It fishes a lot like a Danny plug. And so just the way it works on the surface, the V-wake it gives off, it just looks, obviously we know how good the large Redfins are. Small one, I fished it, not for fish, but just threw it around a bit. It's very, very good looking on the surface. I can't wait to throw this spring. It's kind of going to be a new addition, but I know I'm going to love it, and I know I'm going to throw this a lot. I really like that V-wake action on the surface of the water, just for plugs in general. I'm a huge fan of Danny plugs and the way they work on the surface. And I think that this is going to be a huge addition to my back bay deal in the early spring. One of my favorite things to do is fish in the around harbors where you have when it's like there's a lot of bait in the harbors there, and it kind of pushes out and the water's a little bit warmer. It's another spot that I really like to fish when when it's like early spring, because early spring is very productive for where there's warmer water, and this kind of mimics a thin bait fish, which they're fishing on a lot. They're feeding on a lot of bunker, and it's just going to be a very productive plug. I just have a feeling that this is going to be one of my go-tos, and I'll keep you guys posted once the bass are in if I'm killing it on this or not. There's a very high chance that I'm catching nothing on this, but I cannot imagine that that's the case. It just looks so good. So now that we're kind of going up onto the surface a little bit here, I wanted to talk about some poppers and small spooks. The Stillwater Smack-It Junior is an absolute staple of my bag. You can work this in a few different ways. You can either walk it side to side like a spook, or you can just normal pop, pop, pause type deal where you're just giving it a few pops. And the awesome thing about this is they catch big fish, and they also attract a lot of fish in general. They're a great small plug that is like a conventional popper style lure, and it just sounds really good in the water. It really just gets those finicky bass to come up and hit the surface early in the spring, and I really love this little Stillwater Smack-It. I have a really old one I have from almost like, I don't know, this has to be 8 to 10 years ago I bought that one. So that's a long time ago. And one of the first poppers I ever learned was the Stillwater Smack Junior. And then another extremely productive one is the Rebel Jumping Minnow. And the Rebel Jumping Minnow is an absolute machine when it comes to catching big fish. And actually in late fall, when I was catching those 43 inchers, I was getting them on this. It's just, for some reason, this just catches big fish. And I don't know why, but it is so deadly on the schoolies, in the estuaries, back bays, and even off the sandy beaches. You can throw this and it just kills. I don't know why, but it is one of the most productive little spooks you can out there on the market. It's ridiculous. And I highly suggest fishing this in the estuaries. It can pull some big fish, especially when the herring's around. They feel a little bit more aggressive and they'll come up and crush this thing. It's just amazing. So that's another really productive one. I also use the Puma Plug Walker, which is a little bit bigger spook when there's a little bit bigger herring around. And then the other small pencil popper I like to use is a small cotton Cordel. It's just really loud plug. If the fish are feeding really aggressively or are very active, you can throw this and it will cull in those bass from a far away. It's just such a noisy, tearing up the surface plug. When those bass are starting to feed aggressive, this is a really fun plug to throw. I'm excited for this as well, and it's going to kill it. So that's a small cotton Cordel there. Okay, the last thing I really wanted to, I have a few things I wanted to say before we wrap this up, this podcast, but surf bags. Surf bags are something that I've had a love-hate relationship with for a while now because I've been trying to find the best one for me. I finally broke down, got a custom Flatlander surf casting bag. This is a 6 tube, so it's enormous, but the reason I got the one that was so big is because I wanted to have the ability to I wanted it for guiding, I guess, essentially, but the ability to carry tons of plugs in it. So I got it for guiding. I'm super stoked about it. I can fit everything I need in there, and I can fit duplicates of it. It's a huge amount of space. I've never fished it though, so I can't really speak on that. The one that I wanted to kind of talk about, which is going to be my not my main plug bag, but my go-to, and it was my go-to for the second half of last year, was the Gear Up bag. It held up really great. The Gear Up 2-tube bag held up really great. I beat it to hell, and it literally looks fairly good and fairly fresh. I mean, if you'd be surprised how badly I treat my plug bags. Just they're hanging off of me, and I fall all the time in the really sharp boulder fields. And this is just a really durable bag. It's 2 tubes. It pretty much can fit whatever you need in it. And I've really enjoyed fishing with it. So I'm super excited to continue to fish with this. I have a 3-tube bag that somebody wanted to send me that's going to come in. I'll do a whole review on that. But for right now, the 2-tube Gear Up bag is kind of going to be my, if I'm going out by myself and I know what the bass are on, this is a bag that I'm going to be using a good amount of. Okay. Yeah, and then I kind of wanted to tell a story about last spring. So I was really, last spring I really wanted to catch a big fish in the estuaries. And my whole goal was to really target those big fish in the estuaries. And the more I dug into it, the more I talked to estuary specialists, it seems like, many reasons. I did a lot of good things. I fished the right spots. I fished it in the right tides. I fished the right lures, which was a live eel. You can't beat a live eel when you're targeting big bass. But I just struck out time and time again. The reason I was striking out so much is because, number one, the striped bass fishery is in massive decline. There's not a lot of really big fish around. And like in the fall, they move in waves. And 2 days later, they were crushing it in the same spots that I was fishing. So it's really one of those things that you kind of have to time, and you kind of have to be lucky and fortunate enough to hit it at the right time. And I mean, I know that the windows are really short, and the places in the estuaries that the big bass sit are almost 8 to 10 feet long. I mean, it's tiny, tiny sections where there's going to be bigger bass. That's why it's so hard, especially where I'm at, to really catch some big bass in the estuaries. But, last year I was fishing one day, and I was planning on going out that night or the night after, which is what I ended up doing, and got skunked. But I was throwing a huge 12-inch, that green Danny plug right up there, and in the estuary, and I had this huge bass following in behind it, kind of like hitting it and nudging it a little bit, but not really going after it. And it was massive. It was probably 40 plus inches. I was freaking out. I was so ready to hook into it, and he never ate it, and that killed me. But I'm super excited for this season because I really want to focus very hard on getting a big fish in the estuary, and I really want to focus hard on getting a big bass off the beach. 2 areas I'm not very proficient in. I want to get more proficient in. There's many different beaches around Cape Ann, and I'm going to really fish them hard, and I hope that I can kind of piece them together. Again, it's like small windows, spots within spots type deal, to get big fish off of a lot of the beaches, and it's very time oriented. So I'm there's just a lot of things that have to go right for it to work, but I'm excited to really put in some time in the estuaries. And if that's at the expense of me catching bigger fish, if I was fishing off the rocks, I might have to take that sacrifice. And that's something that I feel like I want to do this season, is really learn in that regard, and really force myself to fish those key tides and key spots on those beaches. And hopefully I can actually pull some solid bass out of them. But we'll see what happens. I'm super excited to start this season. And then, I guess one of the other things I really wanted to talk about was lights, because I get this question a lot. So I primarily fish 2 lights when I'm fishing. I have a neck light, which I fish a Pelican, and it's just a Pelican neck light. You can kind of look at the ones that they have. It's a waterproof one. I have tape over it. If you're watching, I tape some surgical tubing around it. It's easy to go over the neck. It's stretchy. It's not going to choke you out. So that's good. And you can kind of, grab it in your mouth and and then use it. It's a very bright light. And it's very good around your neck. But, the thing is that everybody talks about is they're always very specific about, I guess for me, it's always about redundancy in my lights, because you never want to be stuck, especially off the boulder fields and the rocks, a mile away, and you have to hike back, and it's a new moon and there's no light, and it's foggy or rainy out, and you just can't see a foot in front of you, and have all your lights die. So I also have been using this UK underwater light, and the cool thing about this is I'm not necessarily as worried about fishermen, alerting myself to other fishermen. It's more about the landowners for me. That's kind of the most difficult thing I have to deal with. So when I'm using this, it's very bright, and it kind of will allow the landowners to see where I'm at. So like a lot of people, I like to have a red light. And the cool thing about this is it's a pretty dim light, which I actually really like. But the other really cool thing is it's a fixed thing. So there's a shade that kind of pulls down here. As you can kind of see there, there's a shade that pulls down on this, and you can by twisting it, you kind of twist up this red shade, and that will keep it from being a red or a white light, which is pretty awesome. So it's kind of fixed. So I know whenever I'm turning it on, it's very simple. Whenever I turn on my light, it's going to be the red light. It's not going to be this huge bright white light, and I know I'll be able to easily unhook a fish or put on a new plug, not alerting landowners, not alerting any fishermen that might be in my area. It's something that's very very important in some instances, because it's really frustrating when you're on a really good bite and then police are called. That's always never a fun time. And most policemen are also fishermen too, so if you're trying to keep your spot secret, sometimes that's tough as well. Anyway, so I feel like I covered really what I wanted to cover, and hopefully this podcast is not corrupted and I don't have to delete this one as well, or else I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to scream, because I really have done too many podcasts without uploading one. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. And hopefully I'll be able to get back into my regular schedule and do one a week as the season, creeps closer and closer. I hope you guys start to get onto some bass and start killing it. And I'll see you guys next time.